Not long ago, we were having discussions on the podcast with some owners of new M1, M1 Pro, and M1 Max systems running into out of memory errors. You may remember that. We had some long conversations going back and forth. At the time, it seemed like only a few owners were being impacted, and some of it might have just been chalked up to growing pains, I think, as developers worked through transitioning their apps to universal binaries, moving them over to support Apple Silicon in the M1 processors. Anthony this week emailed me to say that he got a low memory warning for the first time on his M1 Max, and he found something interesting. When he went to check, he was using ISTAT menus, and he found that his ad blocker, Ad Block 1, was using an incredible amount of RAM, 60 gigabytes of RAM, and that force quitting the app freed up the memory, and that helped resolve the issue for him. But it does bring up, for me, a good category of apps that, we might forget to check when we're troubleshooting these kinds of issues. And that's extensions, in this case, specifically browser extensions. So it could be Safari, it could be Firefox, Chrome. It doesn't really matter. A lot of our browsers have extensions or just other apps that have extensions. And you wouldn't necessarily, think of these right off the bat because they're not apps that you launch or run, right? You're launching some other app, and then there is an app basically running inside that app. And memory leaks are a thing that can really impact any application, not just extensions, but, this is an extra category that might be worth looking into. And they really can affect any machine, regardless of whether it's an Intel or an Apple Silicon machine. So it really comes down to the software and the developer, and it could even happen with an update and can be all very specific. So it can be something that can be a little bit hard to troubleshoot, but we can kind of easily identify when we might have a memory leak, or at least something in an app where the app is using a little bit too much memory on our systems. So I thought we'd talk about that a little bit. If you go in and use the activity monitor, you can go in and see how much memory applications are using. So if you go into Applications, Utilities, and then launch the application monitor, you click on the Memory tab. And then I think the easiest way to do this is click on the Memory column to sort by the usage. And there you will see which apps are using the most amount of memory and how much memory each app is using. And if there's something using an excessive amount, you can actually force quit that app or quit that app and hopefully free up that RAM, get it back, and stop those out of memory issues. Now, if you launch it again and it continues to chew through RAM, that could be a sign that you possibly have a memory leak. Now, that might not happen right away because oftentimes if an application or a program has a memory leak, there could be different actions or different behaviors that you have to do first to kind of trigger that leak. So it's possible you might not see it right away. It could look fine when it starts running, but a little bit later, right, you come back, you look in the activity monitor, and suddenly it's chewing through RAM. Now, unfortunately, if the app does have a memory leak, there's probably not much you could do about it besides, quitting the app when it starts to happen and kind of starting over, and then maybe hoping that the developer has been alerted to the issue and issues a patch for the app at some point. Now, if you could reliably repeat the issue, so if you find that there's a series of steps that leads to the memory leak, that might be something that you could email the developer, you contact the developer and their support, provide them with those specific steps that trigger the leak, and that could help them eventually patch their application. So if you're that lucky, that would be a nice thing to do. Just contact the developer, say, hey, I noticed this thing. When I do A, B, and C, the app is starting to chew through the memory, and then I get out of memory error, and kind of give them some screenshots and additional information about your environment, what operating system. The more information that you can give a developer when you're trying to get to support, the better. Don't just send them an email saying, hey, I think you have a memory leak, it's broken, fix it. Like that's not very helpful. If you can do a little bit of troubleshooting, point them in the right direction, you're going to get a lot better response. But, at least you might be able to identify where an app is kind of going off the rails and chewing up some of your memory. Now, some other things to note when you're reviewing memory in the activity monitor in the memory tab, a few other things you might want to look at. At the bottom, there is a nice little graph called memory pressure, and that will show you if your machine is using memory efficiently over time. Now, ideally, you want to see that being all green. That means everything's going great with your memory. You have enough memory. Your apps aren't using too much of it. If you notice that it's yellow or worse, red, that might be a sign that an app is consuming excessive memory, or maybe that you just have too many apps open and using memory for what's available on your system, for the resources that are available on your system. And again, it's going to depend on what kinds of apps you have open and what you're really running. If you're running very memory heavy intensive applications, you're going to be able to have fewer of those open concurrently without chewing up all your memory. But looking at that memory pressure can give you a good idea or sign of how many apps you can have running, or what kinds of apps you can have running. So you could use this as a tool to kind of figure that out. And if you are seeing yellow and red in there, that's a good sign that, hey, maybe you want to shut down some apps, close some things down. Now, generally, the operating system should be managing this pretty well, and assuming the apps are written to play nice with Mac OS and in the ways that Apple recommends, your operating system should be able to shut down background applications and manage the memory. But again, not all apps are created equal. So this is just a good tool that you have in your arsenal to go in and kind of look at this. Another thing to pay attention to in the memory tab is the swap. That's another stat that's worth looking at. If the amount of swap you see in terms of the total size, if it's hundreds of gigabytes, you can have a pretty good idea that you have a problem with your memory. Basically, that your apps are constantly exceeding the physical RAM that's on your system and having to use your hard drive as swap to move items in and out of memory. If you see that, that can be a problem, especially if you have an older Mac with a spinning hard drive. If it's using a lot of swap, that's when you're going to start seeing a lot of that pinwheeling that we all hate, the beach ball of death. It can have a really big impact on performance. That's because, traditional spinning hard drives aren't really that quick. They're certainly not as fast as solid state RAM, the RAM. Now, machines with SSDs, this is far less of an issue. It's pretty efficient. It's pretty fast, but it's still less ideal than just using the RAM that's built into your system. So if you're constantly seeing very large amounts of swap, you might consider, again, reducing the number of apps that you have open at any one time, or you might want to monitor your apps a little bit more closely to see if there's one that is using an excessive amount of RAM and maybe forcing your machine to go into that swap situation. Anytime you're moving into using a lot of swap memory, you're going to see a little bit of a hit in performance. Again, if you have an SSD, you might not notice it, but definitely if you have a spinning hard drive, that can be an issue. And if you have the ability, if you're seeing that a lot and, it's just normal operation, it could be a sign that you really need more RAM. Now, in this day and age, right, a lot of our Macs, you can't just install more RAM in, so you might have to just consider that the next time you're making a purchase of a new machine when you go to upgrade. So maybe if you had 8 gigabytes of RAM, you might consider going to 16 or 32. If you're lucky enough and you have an older Mac system and you can add more RAM, that might be a sign that you want to add more RAM. So there's a lot of things you can do there. Hopefully this gives you some thoughts and ideas on how to better sort of monitor and manage RAM usage on your Mac. Some other tools that might be helpful in monitoring and just managing RAM. I already mentioned ISTAT menu, which is a great just monitoring tool for all kinds of things on your Mac. You can look at RAM, you can look at processor usage, you can look at your fans and the temperature of components on your system. It is a great tool, menu bar app. I use it, absolutely love it. And then also Clean My Mac X. That is another great tool that can help you look at and even better purge memory and clear things out if you are having memory issues. So a couple things to look into. Hopefully this helps you out with looking at memory leaks and just managing memory. If you have additional tips and tricks, send those along, maccast@gmail.com.